Does your AC joint pop or give you pain like mine does in certain positions? If you're looking for exercises and education for everything that you need to know about the AC joint, you're in the right place. Welcome back to the Rehab channel, where we teach you how to take control of your health. My name is Dr. Craig Lindell, and today we're going to be talking about shoulder health, specifically AC joint pain, acromioclavicular joint pain. You got that little nub, that bone right there at the edge of your collarbone. You fell or you're lifting, it's bothering you. Well, let's talk about what that joint is, how does it commonly get injured or hurt, if and when you need surgery after a traumatic injury, and more importantly, exercises to rehab your pain. Let's dive into it. Before we can fix AC joint pain or rehab an AC joint injury, we need to appreciate the shoulder complex. So bear with me, I'm going to go through most of the joints and everything that you need to know so that you can better understand what you're dealing with and what's going on, and then you're going to feel super smart after as well. So I have the shoulder model here matching my right shoulder. I'm going to hold it in this position so that you can get an appreciation for it. We're going to start here, which is the sternoclavicular joint. So right here on my body. And this is a really strong joint. Before this joint gets injured, it's much more likely that you have a collarbone fracture or you have a acromioclavicular joint. So your collarbone makes up your SC joint as well as your AC joint. The collarbone actually moves up and down, hinging, rotating at your SC joint, and that's what helps with scapula elevation as well as scapular depression. Now, if we move on to the scapula is important because it has a articulation between the scapula and the thorax. It's called your scapulothoracic joint. The integrity of the scapulothoracic joint really depends on the health of your SC joint as well as your AC joint. So if you have an issue with your scapulothoracic joint, it's probably because you have an issue with your SC joint or your AC joint. Also, to appreciate with the scapula is the end of it. Up here, you have your acromion, and then here, this little protruding bone here is called your coracoid process. We'll dive into that in a little bit. Now, also, we have your glenohumeral joint. So that's the articulation between your shoulder bone, your humerus, your arm bone, and then also the scapula at the glenoid fossa. So that's where the golf ball sits on the tee. And then we covered the scapula. This is the front of it. You have your acromion, you have the coracoid process. Now, before we get to the AC joint, let's talk about the clavicle one more time. It's your collarbone. It's a disrespected bone. You don't appreciate it until there's something wrong with it. So it's important because there's a lot of muscles that actually connect to your collarbone, from your pec major clavicular fibers to your sternocleidomastoid, which is a muscle that connects from your collarbone to your neck. And then also even your deltoid and your traps have fibers that connect to the collarbone. So if you have an issue with your collarbone or your AC joint, you can appreciate why maybe you're dealing with neck pain, upper back, upper neck pain, even shoulder pain. And now, last but not least, let's get to this AC joint. So your acromioclavicular joint. It's where the clavicle meets the acromion. And it's only supported by a small joint capsule as well as ligaments. Those ligaments include the superior and inferior acromioclavicular ligaments. It also includes the coracoacromial ligaments as well as the coracoclavicular ligaments. There's really two ligaments with the coracoclavicular ligaments, the trapezoid and the conoid ligaments. Those are really important ligaments. If you have issues with those ligaments, a separated shoulder, which we will dive into, then you're gonna have issues with full shoulder range of motion. Because in order to get your arm all the way up overhead, these ligaments actually get tensioned at a certain point to allow your collarbone to literally rotate. Think of like turning a doorknob. This has to rotate backwards so many degrees to allow your scapula to get into a certain position. The AC joint, not supported by much, but it's so important because it allows the rest of the scapula movement that we haven't talked about. So the collarbone elevates and depresses from the SC joint to allow elevation and depression, but the rest of the scapular movements that we know of, so it's upward, downward rotation, medial, lateral tilting, as well as anterior, posterior tilting, all come from the acromion. So it's really important to understand that, and that's why the AC joint is so important. Okay, so now let's talk about AC joint injuries. So a quick reminder, to get full overhead shoulder range of motion, just know that's about 180 degrees. When we talk about scapulohumeral rhythm, we're saying 120 degrees comes from the humerus, the shoulder joint, versus 60 degrees come from the scapula. The first 30 degrees is your shoulder blade rotating up. You're getting some elevation, you're getting some upward rotation, and that first 30 degrees that you get from the scapula primarily comes from the SC joint. That last bit of scapular motion that you need to get your arm fully up overhead, as a reminder, comes from these ligaments getting tight, forcing the clavicle to rotate to get that extra 30 degrees of scapular motion that you need to get your arm overhead. Now, when we talk about injuries, the AC joint, it's susceptible to trauma as well as degenerative changes because it's a small joint, it's not supported by much, it's a small joint capsule, small articulating surfaces. There's a lot of forces that get put into this joint. And if you land on your shoulder, this is the weakest link that's gonna go first. So the common injury is when you land on your side with your arm tucked by your side. What happens is that forces the shoulder blade and the acromion to go down. And then what happens is, think, shoulder blade is gonna go down, collarbone is gonna come up, and that's literally going to tear or injure these ligaments here. It'll tear the joint capsule, and you get this piano key deformity where the collarbone looks like it's sticking up. That's because it's not getting any support from these ligaments here, and this is just now lifting up, and gravity is pulling down on your scapula and your shoulder. When we talk about injuries, there's a lot of different grading systems out there. The most common one is grades from 0 to 6. Basically, grade 1 to 2, you can consider it a partial separated shoulder where there's going to be mild injury, compromise to the AC joint as well as the AC joint ligaments, maybe these ligaments, versus when you have a moderate injury, maybe grade 3, grade 4, the AC joint is going to be disrupted, the AC ligaments are going to be disrupted, and then you probably have partial tears of these coracoid clavicular ligaments. And then if you have a fully separated shoulder, that means that everything likely got torn. Now, when we talk about surgery and we talk about rehab for AC joint injuries, just know more often than not, most people respond really well to conservative treatment, AKA no surgery. Because more often than not, people regain their range of motion. They may just have issues at the top because they're not getting that movement, which depends on the grade of the injury. More often than not, a grade from 0 to 4, you likely don't need surgery. You typically only need surgery if you have a grade 5 or grade 6 really bad traumatic AC joint injury. So just know that you're going to typically respond really well to conservative treatment. It's a matter of you just may have issues up head here. And now, if you didn't have a big traumatic injury, but you're just dealing with AC joint pain, well, let's make sure that that's actually what you're dealing with. So let's talk about assessments and then get into the exercises. 2 quick tests that you can do to know if you're actually dealing with AC joint pain or not. Number 1 is called a resisted AC joint extension test. Basically, you should be doing this passively. Someone else is doing it, but you can do it on your own. Trust me. Get your arm up into this position. Get your elbow at shoulder height. Get your arm rotated this way so that your forearm is perpendicular to the ground. Now, what you're going to do is you're going to try to pull your arm across your body, but you're actually going to push against it. And you can bring it across your body versus you can kind of go the opposite way. And if you are dealing with pain, or there's popping, or there's movement at your AC joint, you may have some issues to the integrity of your AC joint. The other test is just pulling that arm across your body. And what we're doing is we are basically putting compression on where the edge of your collarbone meets that acromion. We are compressing that joint there. And often this is what I see. If I'm evaluating someone, working with someone, when they have an AC joint issue, they're like, I try to get my arm up overhead, and then I bring it in and it just doesn't feel good. And then I'm like, okay, well, let's rotate out. Let's get your arm a little bit away. Maintain, this is called your window, your ear window. Keep that window open. It tends to feel a little bit better. And of course, if you're just dealing with pain and range overhead, potentially maybe dealing with AC joint issues. So let's begin with early stage rehab. Basically, what we're focused on here is regaining your range of motion. Demonstrating with this exercise, we're focused on getting range of motion in all directions, whether it's shoulder external rotation or flexion, abduction. Really, we're gonna focus on restoring your range of motion overhead as best as we can, because that's typically where the AC joint is going to compromise your range of motion. Next is just going to be getting your muscles firing. So this is a great isometric exercise to get your rotator cuff working and getting your scapular stabilizers working again to help with shoulder mechanics when you go to move your arm. Next, now we're gonna put it together. We're gonna challenge your muscles in new ranges of motion so that we can work on shoulder and scapular stability. Last but not least, we wanna get into the most challenging position, which is typically going to be in an overhead position. And we're gonna challenge your rotator cuff as well as your scapular stabilizers and making sure that we're getting the best positioning from your upper back, your mid back, and your scapula. Just know that all of these exercises are part of our shoulder prehab program. And if you are dealing with an AC joint injury, this is going to be the perfect program for you. All right, I hope you learned a lot today. I know I covered a lot, I talked a lot, but you should feel way smarter, you should know way more about the shoulder, and more importantly, you should know what to do if you are dealing with AC joint pain. Remember, the big takeaways are you gotta respect the integrity of the AC joint and understand what it takes to have a healthy AC joint. You learned what commonly happens if you injure your AC joint. More importantly, you should feel a little bit more comfortable knowing whether you need surgery or not. And last but not least, you should be rocking shoulder rehab and shoulder prehab now. So if you haven't checked it out yet, check out our shoulder prehab program. It's literally perfectly designed for anyone dealing with AC joint pain. Trust me, you'll want to take advantage of it and your shoulder will be happy too. All right, until next time, see ya.
Oh, hey, you're still here. Thanks for watching the video and taking control of your health.
Make sure to smash that subscribe button and check out our other YouTube content.
And did you know that we have a website and an app that you can prehab your entire body? Be sure to check out the link in the description.